Hope everybody is doing well on this particular Wednesday afternoon. It's time for another online dinner party where we bring in amazing guests to talk about their lives and the different things that they've got going on and the inspirations that they have provided both to themselves and to others as well. Hope that everybody is having a good day. I know here in Durham, North Carolina, we're waiting for some potential bad weather, even though it hasn't come yet, but they are saying that it is on the way and all along those lines. But I'm hoping that they are wrong. And I know that the folks that are doing an event later on this afternoon at the Hayti Heritage Center are hoping they are wrong as well, because I know that they've got a song, a performance that's actually a kind of a musical opera number that is going to be dealing with kind of inspired by the runaway slaves and the ads that were trying to catch those folks after they had run away from slavery. And it's called Songs of Freedom, if I'm remembering the title correctly, and all in that space. But it is a Duke performance, and they will be over there this evening, I believe, from 7:30 to 9. So it is based on some of those ads that were found where people were trying to catch the runaway slaves and some of the narratives that they had found from the slaves as well. As a matter of fact, there was one where a light-skinned gentleman was talking about being flogged by somebody while they were reciting the Bible and all along those lines. So it was definitely some interesting insights that folks were given at the talk before the performance on yesterday. So that talk was actually on yesterday. And I know that I've been following the NCAA basketball. Didn't know anything with a pool in terms of monetary amounts, even though I did have some online ones. And I'm sure that, like many people, the brackets are totally busted, because I don't know anybody that was predicting NC State to be in the Final Four, except for those that might be diehard State fans. I know that my younger brother actually has been making a little bit of change, because he's been betting on State in every game, including against my alma mater when they played the Golden Eagles and all along those lines. And apparently we couldn't buy a bucket to save our lives and all in that space. So I think we were something like 4 for 31 from the 3-point range. And now it looks like Tyler Kolek, their all-star guard, meaning the one from the Golden Eagles, will be heading into the pros, even though he does have a COVID year of eligibility to go and everything. And also Iguodala will also be heading to the pros, as he's completed his MBA. So he really doesn't have any reason to stick around in the college ranks, but he may test the waters of the NBA as well. But he's also got that MBA if he doesn't make it in the NBA. So that'll be something that he can fall back on and all along those lines. So it's always good to, if you're an athlete, to have those backups. But like I said, I'm sure people were expecting possibly Purdue and Connecticut to be there, but I don't think many people had Clemson and NC State in their Final Four. But I could be wrong. Maybe Brian Butler, who is in the education space and all along those lines, had that in his repertoire, and maybe he thought that that was going to be something that was happening and all in that space. I've also got my good friend Aaliyah Baker on as well, and we'll be talking to her about dance and some other things. And I've also got Ellen Forrestal, who will be joining us as well. But I'll start off just really briefly with Brian, and tell us about this education space, and I'll bring in the ladies as well. But you heard me say that the one good thing, and I know that you've been very much about education and around this notion of education and us having a lot of genius. And I told you that a friend of mine turned me on to Bruce George, and this whole notion of genius is common. And I do know that sometimes the athletes are smart enough to have other interests. As a matter of fact, I
Sure.
think that DJ Burns, who is the star of NC State, has already got some entrepreneurial businesses that he is doing even now. And I'm sure a number of them are getting in the NIL space. And like I said, Osa, who actually was born in the same month as I was in July, decided he was going to get an MBA. So he's actually completing his MBA, which is a good thing. So if he doesn't make it in the NBA, he's got something to fall back on.
Yeah, of course, of course. First of all, Mark, thanks for having me. I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to share a little bit about my background and about my passions. I heard you talk a little bit about the runaway slaves. I am from the Eastern Shore of Maryland,
Okay.
and the person who is from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, who is probably the most famous runaway slave, is Harriet Tubman.
Yes.
I grew up in a town called Salisbury. Harriet Tubman grew up in Cambridge, which is about 30 miles from Salisbury. And so I know that history really well as Frederick Douglass grew up
Mm-hmm.
on the Eastern Shore. And so a lot of connections that are made. Also, my brackets, I didn't do any brackets, but it would have been busted, immediately. And so I was a former college basketball player, and again, making connections. I always say that there's not 6 degrees of separation. There's like 2 degrees of separation between
Right.
people because we always can make connections. My college basketball coach at George Washington played for UNC, University of
Mhm.
North Carolina. His name was John Custer, and he played with Phil Ford back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's always some connections that can be made. But my story really just started, and I tell this when I share with people, because I think it's really powerful. My story started not in 1965 when I was born.
Mhm.
My story started in the 1940s. My dad was born in 1932, but that's not where my story started, because I think the challenge that happened in the 1940s is where the trajectory of our family changed. My grandparents were sharecroppers, and they were people who had a second and fourth grade education.
Mhm.
And I mean, if you think about it, my grandfather was born in the 1800s,
Right.
which is amazing. And so my grandparents were just in this cycle of poverty. Being a sharecropper back then meant that you give most of your earnings to the landowner.
Mhm.
And my dad got to like his 11th grade year, and said, "I want to break the cycle of poverty. I want to go to college."
Mhm.
And in his 12th grade year, he said, "Mom and Dad, I want to go to college. I want to go to Bowie State University, which is a historical black university." And they were like, "Go for it. You got to, education is our path to freedom." There was only one problem. The landowner, who he owned everything. I mean, he owned the house they lived in. It was a one-room house. They had an outhouse. The landowner found out that my dad wanted to go to college, and he comes to the house, knocks on the door, and said, "I hear Paul's going to college." My grandparents were pretty naive. They were like, "Yeah, he's going to college." I mean, they were excited. And the landowner says this: "If your dad goes to college, if your son goes to college, my dad's name is Paul. If your
Mhm.
son goes to college, then I'm going to kick you off the land, and you're going to lose your right to sharecrop this land."
Wow.
But my dad goes to college. So my grandparents said, "You will take the hit. Whatever happens, happens, but you got to go." So my dad goes to college that next year. There were no phones back then, or they didn't have any phones. Anyway, they were too poor. He comes home on a break, and what do you think happened?
He had been evicted, or they had
Yep,
been evicted.
exactly. My grandparents were evicted. This is how powerful education is, Mark. We know this. And so my grandparents were evicted, kicked out off the land. They weren't allowed to sharecrop that land. To make a long story short, my dad, went back and he finished college. He became a reading teacher. Eventually, he became a principal. But he ended his career as a reading teacher because when they desegregated schools, most of the black principals, I don't think people realize this, many of the black principals lost their jobs because they closed the black schools and they had to go back into the classrooms.
Right.
And so my dad ended his career as a reading teacher. I have two brothers. I have a brother and a sister. They were great students. I was the youngest. They were fantastic students, but I had a difficult time learning how to read early on. They wanted to retain me early on. And my parents said, "No, we got this." I was lucky. My dad was a reading teacher. I had an interventionist at home. So I
Right.
think that's where my passion comes from. I think my
Mhm.
passion comes from that it should not matter what house you were born in for you to have a life filled with endless possibilities. So I was literally born in the right house. And so as an educator, I always, go back to this. What would we want for our own kid? And so if
Right.
we would want our own kid to have a life filled with endless possibilities, then we should do anything we in our power to make sure that kids that come to our through our doors in our schools have that life. And so we should be able to collaborate, work together, and that's kind of where my book was born, out
Mhm.
of finding the strengths, passions, talents of every single child. All kids have them. We just have to give them the opportunities and the access to kind of figure it out and help us nurture those challenges and those talents and passions in kids.
Yeah.
And so, I spent 35, 36 years in education, and I loved every minute. I mean, I ended my career in 2017 as a principal. I've done a lot of consulting ever since, and I wrote my book that came out in October of last year. But again, it's really born around let's find and help kids find their gifts because every
Along
kid has
those,
them.
yeah, every kid has a gift, and like I said, I know that Bruce George has that whole notion of genius is common. Whether you might be a talented cook, you may not have the Mensa kind of grades or the Mensa kind of scores
Yeah,
and all along
exactly.
those lines, but you may have another talent. And unfortunately, and I'm gonna bring in one of my other guests who is a longtime friend, and I'm actually gonna share a story of my own and everything. But Aaliyah Baker is in the dance space and all along those
Oh,
lines. And unfortunately,
hello, Leah.
sometimes we are not seeing enough support for the creative arts. Like I said,
Exactly.
Aaliyah teaching ballet over at Hayti, but I do know that when we think about things that are being cut out of our budgets and a number of things, whether it's on the state or the federal level, a lot of times it is the creative arts and the vocational arts and all in that space. So, Leah, if you just want to share a little bit about your own journey, because I know that you moved here from California, where you had a very successful career there, and now you're bringing some of that same model here to North Carolina and all along those lines.
Yeah. Hi, y'all. How are y'all
Hello.
doing? Let's see. I grew up in North Carolina. I don't know if you knew that, Mark, but I was born in New Jersey, but my family moved to North Carolina early on when I was about 10. Ironically enough, this connects to the conversation. They moved from New Jersey to North Carolina for the schools, for my sister and I, so that we could get access to really high quality education. And also at the time, the schools we were going to did have arts programs in the school. So I got to dance in school, and I also got to dance in after school extracurricular activities growing up. And I think I'm so lucky to have had that opportunity, and really grateful to my parents for kind of making a way so that I could have all of this arts enrichment and education, which really from the beginning I knew that I loved dancing. I trained primarily in ballet and some modern dance, a little bit of West African, but not a ton. But I really fell in love with ballet early on, and it has been something that stuck with me since I was 4 years old. This passion for this form that a lot of Black people in particular are either don't have access to, or are told early on, or that they're not the right person to do ballet. They get discouraged. People
Yeah.
tell them they have the wrong body, or they're never going to make it as a professional, and so folks are discouraged and they leave. So after having a professional career in California, it was really important for me to think about how I could take what dance gives me on a daily and weekly basis and sort of use that as a tool to connect with the community, and also let people kind of find their own genius. So right now I
Yeah.
teach a series called Ballet for Black and Brown Bodies. It's people of color, mostly adults, who show up every week to learn ballet, and people are coming in with their varying levels of experience. Some people are absolute beginners when they start the class. Some people might have done it when they were young. Some people have, maybe danced in college and then quit and went on with their professional careers and then came back. And it's really just a delight. And I'm so happy that we found a home on Tuesday nights at the Hayti Center and have been building a pretty dedicated group. I'm so excited. But I think the best part for me, besides getting to share the thing that I really love to do, is kind of breaking down those barriers between that particular art form and Black folks and our culture. And then also getting to see each student have their own sort of journey of growth and find their own love and excitement in something that I really love. So it's been wonderful every week to have those classes and share that together.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
along those same lines and everything, I was just wondering because I know that if you think about bluegrass and country music, definitely Beyonce got a lot of or some pushback because she did a country song, even though we know that a lot of the instrumentation is African based and all along those
Yeah.
lines, but it's not always acknowledged. And I think that even you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ali, and everything, but I think that even Misty Copeland has acknowledged that some of ballet has some African roots as well. It may not be strictly that, but it does have some African roots and everything. But I don't think that the ballet community even acknowledges that as much as it probably should. But I just wonder if you can share that, because I do think I heard an interview where she talked about some of the roots that come to the Black and Brown community.
Yes, that's totally right, Mark. I mean, it's a deep cut, but someone like me who's a dance nerd, I would say, and really loves to research it and go back as far as, as far as I can. if you go back to the 1300s, the 1400s, when Africans were in Spain and in Italy and sharing their art and sharing the music. This is why we know that there's African influence on these forms from the beginning, because of the instruments and the music that was done, and music and dance that were so, closely linked when ballet was being codified into a form. So it really came from the African folks that were in Italy sharing it at the courts, the Italian courts. The Italian courts then took it to France. And then in France, it got written down and got codified and, got all the names and the French terminology that we still use to this day. But the African influence is really in there to a certain extent. And then when you look at when ballet comes to America, so in the 20th century, the early 1900s, and it starts to travel around the country, Black people and white people and other people are all doing ballet alongside each other. So everyone was kind of learning it. It was a thing that people did as a way to be refined and to be presented in society. Folks are learning how to, move gracefully and dance gracefully and work with, partners and cotillions and things like that. So people were, all kinds of people were doing ballet alongside each other. And when we get to probably like the 1930s and 40s, and when jazz music and jazz influence starts to be really prevalent, you start to see like a jazz impulse come into the American style of ballet. So, I mean, I could go on and on and on and on about this, but just know that Black people have had their, imprint on ballet from the very beginnings. And
I love this.
In, particularly the way that American ballet is done, which is different than, say, ballet in Russia or Italy and France. And even in England, American ballet has a real sort of athletic and jazzy approach, which is very much influenced by Black culture and Black art.
And if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you were in the area of around California, and I believe it was Oakland, you were actually teaching it in some neighborhoods that would be considered rough neighborhoods, and definitely some that were tied into the hip hop community as well and everything. So I was just wondering, how much were you able to use dance as a way to reach out to our young people sometimes, because I hate using the term at risk. My brother actually works with some kids that would be termed that, because I think that if you use that terminology, you're already creating a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy and all along those lines. But I just wanted your take in terms of teaching in those kinds of neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, I think my true belief is that dance is for everyone. And then I also think that within our communities, there is this sort of inherent presence of music and dancing. We do it as communities, we do it for celebrations, we do it for funerals. There are all of these different reasons and ways that dance comes into our lives as Black folks. And so that's really where I try to make that kind of point of entry. Like, this might be one particular way of dancing, but bending your knees is bending your knees. So you can bend your knees in all kinds of different ways, and we can kind of connect even some things that we do potentially in like a hip hop style dance with things that happen in ballet. There's each genre of dance has its own logic and its own specificity, but there's really a lot of overlap between them because, we're using the same instrument, our bodies. And so there's a lot of things that can be transferable. And I think that they can feed each other. I mean, I think I'm a better dancer if I take a West African dance class, or if I take a hip hop dance class, which is not the form that I studied the most, but there's so much I can learn about rhythm and about weight and about having multiple points of interest in your body that, ballet is very linear and very kind of one line, but I learned so much from doing kind of forms from the African diaspora that make me a better ballet dancer.
I want to take your dance class now. I'm like, I need to drive down to North Carolina and take your class. That's pretty cool.
Yes, I would be so happy to have you. It's like anybody who wants to show up. I mean, my favorite thing about doing at the Hayti Center is we have, lots of adults, all genders come and try. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes they'll bring their young ones. So I have one of my cousins takes the class a lot, and she brings my younger cousin. And it's been so great to watch him like learn and absorb, and he gets really excited, and now he'll get up and try to do some of the moves. So if you expose kids to things early on, they're not intimidated by them, and they want to try it, and just nurturing that is really exciting for me.
Hey Brian, along those same lines, I kind of alluded to it earlier, what is your thoughts? Because I think you even talk about it in your book about this notion that sometimes we are too quick to label people. I know that a lot of times, even in the way that we want to, and I'm not saying that they're not people that have attention deficit disorder or that have some other things, but sometimes we are quick to medicate them, whether that's with Ritalin or a number of
Right.
other things. But as an educator, I just wanted your take on that.
Well, I think, and I will readily admit that early on in my career, I was the poster child of kind of labeling kids, and I'm not proud of it now because I think about it, and when we label kids, especially after becoming a little bit more experienced or seasoned, I understand that, and you said it before, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, we give a kid a label and we teach to that label. Or we lower our expectations or change our expectations because of that label. And I always say, let's label the skill that we need to work on, not the kid. Kids shouldn't be barcoded, right? A kid is a kid, and or any human. And if a student is struggling, then don't label the student. Label the condition or what they're struggling with, and attack that with fervor and work on it as a team, as a school. What skill is that student lacking that needs to be supported, instead of labeling that skill that kid is slow or a bad kid or whatever? Because I don't believe there's bad kids. I believe there's kids who come to us who have they haven't been taught proper behaviors, or behaviors have been modeled to them that are not appropriate for school. And so we have to help them unlearn some of those behaviors and then teach the proper behavior. When I first became a principal, I was kind of hard on kids, and again, you learn through experience. But when I first became a principal, some kids would come to us and they weren't behaving properly, and sometimes I would send them home, and the same kids who were not behaving properly that I sent home were back in my office the next week. And after a while, I'm like, well, if we actually teach kids who are lacking academic skills, then we should be teaching kids who lack behavioral skills those behaviors, right? And so when we start to, that aha moment came on, it's like, okay, we need to teach these skills because they are lacking those skills. You can't expect somebody to know something that they haven't been taught or that has been modeled to them inappropriately. And so I think the idea of labeling has, since my early career, I've tried to help educators understand that the label is not going to help us. The label might be an initial identifier of something that we might be incidentally, going on, but a kid who has a quote special ed label, two kids could have two totally different issues going on. So let's make sure that we are identifying those issues and teach them and support those issues, not the label.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Before I bring in the final guest and everything along those lines, to hear some of their story as well and everything, I was just wondering along those same lines, because and I don't think that Aaliyah knew this, and I know that you didn't know this, Brian, but during the pandemic, a friend of mine is actually a friend of Jason, who runs our poetry team and everything, is a haiku master. And during the height of the Clubhouse, he created the Funky Eye Puppets, which was a audio troupe, an audio theater troupe, like for a better term. And one of the things that IPC, that's his stage name, and he's a disciple of George Lucas, in addition to being a haiku poet, talked about is this notion that too often we got so much busy adulting that we forgot that childlike wonder. So he would sometimes get us, including myself, because I was one of those actors that would sometimes be in my head because I'd be playing characters, and sometimes you don't want to play characters because you're trying to be an adult, and all along those lines and everything. So I was wondering, do you sometimes feel that we don't encourage creativity and that childlike wonder even in our adult years? Because like I said, it did take me a while and some encouragement from some of my fellow castmates and everything to get out of that notion. And of course, there was some anybody that's into improv knows about the I think it's called as is, or some of those little tricks that they use and everything. And if, that's what it's called, and if, and all along those lines and in that space. But we had to get into those spaces and play some of those games in order to have that childlike wonder. But I just wondered, you sometimes think that we don't do enough encouragement of that even in our adult folks. And as you know, Leah, and I know other people that watch know, there are folks that are still doing it even in their older ages. My dad's other half is a dance critic, and she's also done some dance performances. And I want to say Linda Bellins is in her 70s. Again, dad's in his early 80s, and I think she's a few years younger and everything. And of course, people know about the Quilt Circles and the Dancing Divas, which is a elderly cheerleading troupe here in Durham and everything. But I don't know that we encourage enough of that from our young people. But I just wondering y'all's take on that.
No, I mean, I would agree. I think this childlike wonder thing and how do you not lose that throughout your life is pretty interesting. I mean, I'm 42, so I'm kind of, navigating that. I'm lucky that, again, I've been able to pursue my passions through my life. So I get to teach dance right now. I'm teaching at the Hayti. I get to teach students at Duke, which is really great. And it's interesting to teach the students that are in college because they're coming in and they're like ready to be an adult, right?
Yeah.
So they're ready to know all the answers, they want to learn, they're eager to learn, but they want to perfect it right away. And they want to have a really good argument and they want to be just good at it immediately. And so part of our class is really, especially for these students that are, super, super hard on themselves and really trying to be high achieving, it's kind of letting them know that if you're starting something and you're doing it for the very first time, you might not be an expert on it. And you might, fall, or it might not look great or the way you want it to look. And it might feel weird and you might have to learn something new along the way. But it's, I think by the end of the semester, we get to the point where people really can appreciate the process of being a novice at something and kind of starting that learning process again and not having to know the answers and knowing that, there is something to be said about being interested and working over time and gaining skills and seeing yourself grow and, following the curiosity of it and not taking it so seriously that you're like, oh, if I don't do it perfectly, then I can't do it. I mean, with a lot of the students, they're worried about being embarrassing themselves in front of other students, right?
That's interesting. I write about in my book this idea of the growth mindset, and over my shoulder is a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck. Mm-hmm. And she talks about this idea that, developing your intelligence or developing any skills, you're going to, learn from failing. You're going to have setbacks. You're going to have to be okay with the idea that failing or not being good at something is actually a part of the learning process, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what we try to do with our students, is to help them understand that there is no perfection is a myth. Progress is the goal. Perfection, when we try to say you have to be perfect, that's in the eye of the beholder. And so somebody's always, trying to reach this goal of perfection when the goal should be, can I be better than myself from the day before? And also the idea of, curiosity and play is something that we all should be encouraging throughout our lives, because I think I heard somebody say, I'm not sure if it was Mr. Rogers or somebody, and said that play is the highest form of research, especially for kids. Think about kids in a sandbox or on a playground, and think about all the types of behaviors that are happening during that space.
Yeah, but Brian, along those same lines and everything, one of the things that I know, and my nephews are now about to be 15 and 16 this month in August and everything, but I do remember that when they were born back in 2008 and 2009 respectively and everything, my dad, who is a educator and an artist himself and everything, would be going around showing them different things in science and different things around the world and everything in that space, because he was trying to get them in that educational mindset at a very early age. Now, you have some scientists, I'm not saying all, but some scientists that will make this argument that our brains aren't fully developed until a certain part of our life, and therefore some of that education or early education isn't as needed. I would argue that that's a bunch of baloney and everything.
But we can always plant the seed, right? Right. And we can water that seed, and we might not see it sprout, but you're planting it and you're nurturing it.
Yeah, or it might sprout like in a completely different direction.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, no one in my immediate family was a dancer. My mom is a lawyer, but growing up, she was a cheerleader. So she was definitely like physically active. She also loved music. So she was a music major in like high school. and she played music for us all the time. So I think her love of music is really where I got that connection to like wanting to move to music, as you know, that's the outlet for me. And I think that it's interesting to see how, if you know, thinking about my young cousin who's 6 years old. So there's no part of me that thinks he's going to grow up to be a dancer, but he loves to dance and he feels good when he's dancing. And I want him to always keep that part of him where it's confident and he can dance and let go and have a good time, because so many people are just, like I said, too scared to like, what am I going to look like if I do this? And sometimes it's just, it doesn't matter if it's good, but are you enjoying it? Like that's
like I said, and I've said it on this show, I've said it on other shows as well. I sometimes think that I have two left feet in terms of dance rhythm and all along those lines. So in my mind, one of the greatest inventions was actually an invention from the 70s and the 80s, and definitely all along those lines, because I am a big fan of strobe lighting, because strobe lighting, it doesn't matter how bad you are dancing, it makes you look very good.
Everyone looks wonderful.
Yeah, so everybody looks wonderful under the strobe light, no matter how bad you might be doing in actual rhythm. But even to your point about this notion of nobody knows how good they are, and all in that space. A lot of people, and there are people that argue as to who is the greatest, but I would say that there is no doubt that in the top five is Michael Jordan from UNC and everything. And Michael Jordan actually did not play ball in high school, from my understanding, and he was definitely, I think it was like his latter year in high school and then definitely his college that he's became the all-time great that he became and everything. But he was definitely not doing it that traditional route of starting like at the grade school all the way through, because I want to say it was either junior high or high school when he even first touched the basketball.
Yeah, well, sorry, Brian. I was going to say, I feel like that just goes to show that like skills are transferable, right? So, you know, if you learn something in one place, a lot of times you can kind of expand that or explore that in another. And sometimes it makes you better. Like, who's the Patrick Mahomes? Wasn't he a shortstop? Yes. And everyone says he's so good at throwing and so good at twisting his body in all these different ways because he played baseball. And now as a, you know, quarterback, he's able to do things that other people can't do. So.
Yeah. And in my book, I talk about this idea of the opportunity gap and opportunities and how if we can give kids lots of different opportunities to see what they like or to actually, you know, do something that might transfer to something else that they might be interested in, it really will help them find their strengths, their passions. But if a kid, you know, doesn't have those opportunities, think about it, Aaliyah. If you didn't have your mom was a cheerleader, or your parents didn't put you in certain schools, where would you be today? One of my mentors said, you know, not long ago, she said, Brian, you know what? And when she read my book, she said, you know what? There are so many people who die with the song still in them. Mm-hmm. Because they never found their gifts. It wasn't because they weren't talented or they weren't smart. They just didn't have the opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those opportunities are very important in everything. I was actually watching yesterday, speaking of opportunities, and sometimes the opportunities are much more needed than you are expecting them to. And all along those lines, because I was watching, I think it was on ESPN yesterday, and it's probably aired several times, but it was a very touching story involving actually some people from Duke and everything, Aaliyah, but it was involving the Boozer brothers, or Carlos Boozer, who went off to an NBA career and everything, but his son has sickle cell, and the title of the piece was Blood Brothers, because they literally had his twin brothers born to help with some of the treatment for the sickle cell and all along those lines. So they are tied together. So they are helping their older brothers through some of the treatment as they are going through it and everything, because they're now adults. I think the older one, the one that had them more the sickle cell in, and I think both Carlos and his ex-wife had the trait and everything. But the son, the oldest son, is a successful baseball player. Speaking of baseball and everything, and is looking at a baseball career, and both of the Boozer brothers are being courted by colleges and possibly by the NBA, because that's their dream, is to play in the NBA together. Just like they're saying that LeBron wants to play with his sons, they want to play on the same team and all in that space. But in them cases where having those resources, because if he wasn't who he was in terms of being an NBA player, I don't know that he would have had the same access points that some other people might have had.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's very true. Maybe we'll get lucky and they'll come to Duke.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
They could absolutely come to Duke because their father came there, so they could come to Duke as well. That is a possibility. I want to bring on Ellen so she can share a little bit of her story, because she's also involved as well. So how are you doing, Miss Forrestal? And if
Hello.
you'll share a little bit about your journey as well, because this is all what the dinner party is all about. We share our lives and life lessons learned. So if you share a little bit about yourself as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mark. And lovely to hear that conversation. I'm really, I'm all about education. I'm all about music and dance, and people get self-expressed, and you can actually just have a great life and don't die with your music still inside you. Maya Angelou was right.
Yeah.
You have to.
That's heartbreaking.
You have
though.
to find that.
Yeah.
Find that. And sometimes, we have to be encouraged to look for it. It mightn't always come our way. We need to be encouraged to look at this a lot around if you keep your eyes open and your ears. So, I'm not sure where to start now. I'm here. I'm visiting.
Yeah,
from
just share a little
Ireland.
bit about your own background and what you got going on in your life. That's kind of what Brian and Aaliyah did, but if you'll share a little bit about your journey as well. And there's some general questions I ask just about everybody, including that lovely work-life balance and that inner critic, which I'll probably get to with all three of you and everything. But if you share a little bit about your own background.
Okay. Well, I suppose just even, Brian talked to you earlier about, where the trajectory of your sort of life altered, and look back into the backgrounds. And actually, I'm actually in America at the moment because of my grandfather. So my grandfather came here in 1922. And then I thought, 100 years later, wouldn't that be a good idea for me to come and retrace his steps?
Oh, wow.
And he came and he went, he spoke in 20 cities across 13 states in 52 days. I thought, that's a good idea. I could do something like that. Now, it's a lot more challenging. A lot of the places that he spoke aren't here anymore. A lot of the train routes that he traveled aren't available anymore. But he came on a diplomatic mission. So he was a diplomat. It came from the Irish Free State. There was just a new government. We were kind of in the middle of a war of independence. And he came really to America to thank the Americans for, what they had contributed to getting the new government in Ireland. And then came to ask for continued support. But the sad fact was really, so while he was away, or while he was here, his family was actually getting ill at home, and because he'd been in prison, we think that he maybe picked up TB in prison. Mm-hmm. It was a very serious disease, and 2 of his children were getting sick when he was away, and one died before he got home, and the second one died not long after he got home, and then he died himself about 3 months later.
Wow!
And civil war broke out. So really, the whole kind of tour was kind of sad in a way. But anyway, I kind of felt, 100 years later, it was kind of worth reviving the story and a little bit of, he died at 37. And my father was born, he was born in July. His dad died in September. And
wow.
So my dad, so he was 37 when my dad was born. And I was actually 37 when my dad died. And I thought, that's kind of, this all 37 is there for some reason. I'm going a little bit off the point. But really my background, so I actually went into health. I didn't go into any kind of public life or any kind of politics like my grandfather, even though they thought I would. And I went into medicine. And so I was in the academic system, medical system, for like 30 odd years. And then I retired out of medicine, and I kind of went into what I really, a little bit more, educating people into maybe broader aspects of life, not just academia. Academia can be very narrow. And so I got involved in a publishing company, and I published, inspirational diaries, and just have all of that kind of broader thinking from multiple sources so that people can see little snippets. It isn't like a big long thing. You have to study them, just little things, like you said, don't die with your music inside you. All these little encouraging quotes. And then I wrote my own book. I wrote my own memoir, because my background was that I had a stammer, which is why I didn't speak and why I didn't go into public life and why I didn't become a politician. And so that was kind of things. And then it was just a matter of overcoming that and getting the courage to actually to kind of go beyond that and say, look, if something needs to be said, maybe I need to say it. And just to get over that fear of what people are going to think, and whether I'm going to be embarrassed, like you said, or whether I'm not going to get it right. Get over all of that. And come here and then just enjoy and come on your show, Mark.
Well, I appreciated everything you talked about, that stammer and everything. I was going like, well, you could become the president of Ireland, because our own president, Mr. Biden, has a serious stammer problem. That's what a lot of people forget and everything. But it is a known fact that he has that stammer, and he's definitely deals with it on the speaking circuit, even though the last time that he was in front of Congress, he seemed to have conquered it totally, because he was giving them a hard time. And all along those lines, he definitely has that stammer that is part of his history and part of his repertoire and everything. But even what you had said, Ellen, and Brian, you kind of brought it up and everything. is, do you think we do enough of a job of honoring those folks that are legacy people that have done this great achievements? Because like I said, I was going to mention it even when you were talking about your relative, because if you go down to Raleigh, which is our state capital here in North Carolina, you will find a library called Richard B. Harrison and everything. It was the African-American library that is now part of the library system and everything. My grandmother actually started that in 1940. So like I said,
Wow.
we were talking about the height of segregation. And she also went to Columbia when nobody went to Columbia. There was African-American. So she was definitely a trailblazer. And it's something that I know my dad followed in her footsteps, and now I'm following in their footsteps because they have some legacy, including a radio station, meaning my parents did and everything. So I do think that sometimes we don't do a good enough job of honoring those legacies of the past and everything. Because sometimes when I mention that that's who started the library, a lot of people, even in our own area, meaning the Raleigh-Durham area, aren't aware of their history, even though there is a collection named after her in that library. But I just wanted y'all's take as to whether we do a good enough job of honoring those legacy people.
You know, I think for me, when I think about my grandparents who really took a hit, I mean, they really said, we're going to sacrifice our livelihood so our son can get an education. And what they did is immediately they were hurt, but they changed generations. They didn't just change my dad, they changed me, because if I was born in a different family with you know the difficulty and the challenge to learn how to read at that time, I don't know where my trajectory would have kind of landed or took me. And then for me, and Mark, you said it, are we honoring them enough? And that's why, you know, I am sharing about my grandparents through my books and in my talks more and more. I didn't know this coming up. My dad got sick in 2014 and he had this heart issue and he lived until 2020. But the last few years, he started telling stories about our family and about the history. I had never known this before. And so it gave me an appreciation for the sacrifice that, you know, those who came before us really, they gave of their blood, their sweat, their tears. They gave everything. They gave of their livelihood so their son could have a better life. And so that's why I'm sharing more now about my grandparents, about my dad. But more importantly, I'm sharing because I think it should not matter where you were born. And that's why I talk about the opportunities. We should be, as educators, as adults, trying to give kids, no matter who they are, as many opportunities as possible so they can find what's going to light their fire.
Yeah, hey, Brian, along those same lines, there is a gentleman on this particular network, meaning Pod TV, that sometimes is of the opinion, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with him, that part of the problem with American society is the deterioration of the two-family household. But I would argue that there have been a number of people that have been quite successful that came out of single family households and all along those lines. And you were in the education space, so just wondering, what would your answer be to folks that are discounting folks because of their circumstances, because of divorce or because of other reasons that they are operating in that single family space?
I would say that could it be a factor? It could be, but it's not an excuse. And so for educators, especially for my staff and for our team, I said, you know, we're not going to look out the window. We're going to look in the mirror and say, we have the collective knowledge, skills, experience, and expertise collectively, all the degrees in this building, we should be able to figure it out. Now, when we look out the window and we have kids coming with different challenges, that is only context for how we are going to address that issue. We're not going to lower our expectations. We're not going to say, oh, poor kid, he came from here or she came from here, or they don't speak the King's English or whatever. What we're saying is that's context. Okay, now let's get to work. How are we going to get them here, right? And so we're not going to play that game, because we play that game, we open up a Pandora's box, and then we're feeling sorry for everybody, right? And so and again, we're going to have empathy, and we're going to love the kids, but we're not going to love them into lower expectations. We're going to love them into higher expectations to say, okay, that's where you come from. We have many examples in this world where people have come from challenges and they've been successful. You're going to be one of them. You're going to be one of them. You're going to be one of them. You all are going to be one of them, because we're going to figure it out for you and help you find your path.
Hey, Brian, this is for everybody, including Ellen and Aaliyah as well. I know that because I have a multitude of jobs, but one of them is working for a testing company. And I do know that sometimes people are frustrated because they feel that whether it's on the college level or definitely on the high school level, that we are teaching to the test. So I was just wondering your thoughts around that, because that is something I hear a number of people that complain about it. And like I said, they're one of the leading testing companies based here in North Carolina, based in Durham. And yet that is one of the jobs outside of Hayti that I have and everything. But I just wondered your thoughts around this notion of teaching to the test and some of our teachers doing that.
Well, I would just like, again, to refer back, again, to history, because I think it's what do you do with the history you have and how do you actually pay it forward?
Yeah.
So back in Ireland, so in 1916, which we're celebrating here, the Easter Rising, there was an uprising, and there was a lot of people were actually shot, in terms of, by the British forces. And one of those people that was shot was a man called Pádraig Pearse. And Pádraig Pearse was very visionary about education in Ireland. He had a very vision. And again, it was like that fostering, it was almost finding that inner genius of the child and really fostering that and bringing that out. And in 1912, I think, he wrote a paper, an essay called The Murder Machine. And it was a kind of a scathing, just a commentary on what this system that was being imposed on us, by the schooling, that we were going to sit in classrooms, we were going to be delivered at, we were going to be taught at for X number of years, just deliver, and then regurgitate. And he just felt this was like killing to the Irish soul, the Irish spirit that wanted to kind of, be just exuberant and learn and contribute and whatever. And this was the education system we were having. And he was one of the guys that was shot. So, and again, he was in his 30s, and my grandfather would have been one of his, all they were interested in was education, was culture, was the Irish language, the whole spirit of Ireland. That's what they were interested in. They weren't interested in any kind of fighting for anything. It was like, no, could we please have a peaceful country so we can actually, explore our culture? Sure. So like you said, what we are doing and filling this test machine, it is soul destroying, and it's breaking young people's spirit really, really early. And Albert Einstein, you talk about Albert Einstein being a very smart chap, kind of a genius. And Albert Einstein says, his quote is, everyone is born a genius. But if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its whole life believing that it's stupid. Yeah. And children really, once you start to feel that you're stupid as a child, you're going to do everything to avoid that feeling. It's really painful. And you're going to try and be smart. You're going to try and fit in. And you're going to try and compare yourself to somebody else. You're going to try and make yourself feel better. And it's just an awful system that it's designed in a way to make some people feel smart and some people feel stupid. And it's just killing, because there's no stupid people. People do stupid things, but really, people are people and they do stuff. And I just think that's one of my real, issues with the thing is that, it thinks you're smart just because you got a college education. Yeah. No, you're smart academically, but you're not. There's a lot of other ways to be smart and creative and contribute really massively to the world in general.
No doubt about that and everything. Haley, just really quickly, because I don't know if you want to tackle that question as well, but I do know, and you kind of alluded to it, there's this notion that everybody can be taught to dance, everybody can be taught to sing, everybody can be taught to do this and that. And I do know, as you just said, that there are different levels and everything, but I sometimes think that not every creative skill can everybody have, because like I said, I do not consider myself a great dancer, consider myself to have 2 left feet, and even though I have this voice for radio, I don't know that it would be a singing voice and all along those lines. But I was just wondering your thoughts about this notion that everybody can exercise their creative talents, because I don't know that necessarily is always the case.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that everyone has access to movement and dance, and it might also look completely different for each person, right? So if we're thinking of these like testings, like if we're trying to like fit everyone into one little number or one little box, then of course a lot of people are going to fall outside of that. But I think that even, with my students and the things that I'm asking them to read, like we think about folks that might have physical disabilities, right? When they come into a dance class, like how can you engage them? If someone, can't walk, maybe they can still move their arms. Maybe they can still move a part of their body. Maybe they can even just feel the music internally, and that is dance for them. And I think it's just your standard has to be for the person that's in front of you, and not necessarily this like universal standard that fits every single person, right? And that's, I mean, when things get professionalized, I think that changes. It doesn't mean that every single person is going to become, Misty Copeland. But that doesn't mean that they can't enjoy dancing. They can't be in the room when it's happening. They can't learn, they can experience it and find some fulfillment on their own. In my classes, I've been, as a, budding educator, I'm really thinking about ballet. Again, it's pretty exacting. When I grew up, there were right and wrong things to do. And I've tried to move away from that language. So I think what I try to use in the class is that there are ways that ballet asks us to do certain positions that ask us to hit and marks and lines, and they have a reason, and there's like this whole process behind it and why we hit these certain lines, but it doesn't necessarily make you wrong if you're not making that exact line. They're different choices, and we have agency over our bodies, and we can make different choices in how we move. And so I've kind of moved away from the wrong to different, right? So I'm asking for this and you did this, maybe one arm versus the other arm, and it's not wrong, it's just different. And so how do we kind of, massage those edges a little bit so that we don't, again, discourage people or make them think that because they don't look like someone else, or it's not this sort of myth of perfection in their head, that they can't engage with it at all, right? And some of the people who maybe, for instance, went into a ballet class and danced, and folks told them, oh, they weren't good at it, they weren't good dancers, are like the best dancers in the world by some other standards, right? So it just really depends on kind of, what standard are we looking to? And, there's different flavors for everything. So we don't all have to be, the vanilla.
That makes a lot of sense and everything. I will tell you this, though. And of course, he passed away many years ago, at least a few years ago and everything. But when Baba Chuck was living, and he was a great proponent of African dance and all along those lines, I would be lying if I told Joe that I was not petrified whenever he would do those kind of like common dances, or the dances in the common ground and everything, because I was always afraid that he would call my name and that I had to go out there and embarrass myself. So I would definitely go and make myself intentionally invisible during that time. So I might have been talking to him in the front of the row and even having an engaging conversation with him. But by the time I knew we were getting to that part of the performance, I was going toward the back area and everything.
Mark, let me tell you a secret. I probably would be the same way in a West African dance class. It's like sometimes I know you go around the circle at the end and everyone gets to come in and show a move that they learned and thank the drummers and, ancestors and all of that stuff. And sometimes I feel intimidated in those spaces too. It doesn't stop me from trying, but I have to kind of check that when I walk in the door and try to practice what I preach a little bit. If I'm telling my students to even give it a try, even if it's just feels like a complete disaster, it's like in the trying that we learn something, and in maybe the failure and, getting some guidance and practice over time, that we might learn something that can serve us later on in life, even if it's not doing a particular dance. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Everything. Hey, Brian, just really quickly, and keeping the conversation going and everything.
Sure.
I kind of alluded to it and all along those lines, but how do you do that whole work-life balance? I know that Aaliyah is actually relatively newly married and all in that space. It's not been that long of a period that she's been in that space. And I don't know what Ellen's situation is, but I'm just wondering, how do you manage that work-life balance? Because I know that that's something we talk a lot about on this network and just in general, because I know that even I'm in that single space and in the early 60s, that even managing those different jobs that I just talked about, as well as just trying to get into a social life and everything, can be a challenge. And I'll just put that to you that way. So how do you do that work-life balance?
That's an interesting question. One of my friends, his name is Steve Frick, and he's an orthopedic surgeon. We had this conversation one time, and he said, "Brian, it's a myth, work-life balance." He said, he said, "I've thought about this for a long time. It's really a myth." He said, "I now think about work-life integration." He said, "There's never really a balance." He said, "How do you integrate? Because sometimes, something's going to take precedence, like work may take precedence. And so how do you make sure you're integrating the leisure part or the self-care part into that, or vice versa?" Now it's a little bit easier for me. As I said, I retired from being a principal in 2017. And then I went on the road, and I was on the road for about 210 days or 220 days a year. I was throughout Australia, throughout Canada, and the US. And then the pandemic hit. And I think the pandemic for many of us was tough, but it also gave me time to pause, because I was on the road too much. and I was starting to, so I didn't have a balance. You know, my wife was, you know, working at the time. And so I was away a lot. And so the pandemic hit, and I've, you know, slowly, you know, gotten back on the road, but not as much as I, you know, had before. And I won't again, because I'm getting close to 60 as well. I'll be 60 next year. And so I think about, one, am I eating healthy? Not always, but I try to. Am I exercising? And I put myself around people. My wife, Kathleen, is a health nut, which is a great thing, because now when she's exercising, it's this positive peer pressure. I'm like, I got to get up this morning because she's already going running. And so I think putting yourself around people who are healthy is really important. And also, you know, listening to your body, because as we get older, your things start to break down. And so I can get out of bed in the morning and I pulled a muscle because I was sleeping the wrong way. And so I think for me, it's just paying attention to my body, my mind, and making sure that I'm just not running on empty. And I'm not sure if that's a great answer. I don't look at it now as work-life balance. I look at it as, am I integrating, you know, both sides at a time where it's needed.
Eileen, how about yourself? How do you do it and everything? How do you do that work-life balance? And you just said you've been traveling all over the world, so you've got to integrate the travel as well. So how do you do that work-life balance?
Well, I just chose to travel this time. It's not, I retired, I suppose, from my medical career in 2014. But even prior to that, I actually chose a half-time job because I didn't want to be, you know, working all the hours.
Yeah.
To me, it's about life, and it's about having a really nice life while you have it. You know, okay, my grandfather died at 37. You know, I've got beyond that. My dad died at 76. My mom died at 89. I don't know when I'm going to go, but really, while I'm here, I really want a good time. But I want it now because I don't know when it's going to. If I'm saving for the future, I don't know what that's going to be.
Yeah.
So it's just about life and prioritizing, I think, and just looking after, you know, myself and looking after the people around me, and just, you know, having a nice time and not getting stressed about things and not getting anxious about things, and just dealing with things one thing at a time, one day at a time, plan it as best I can. And if it doesn't go according to plan tomorrow. And if I don't get it done today, maybe I'll get it done tomorrow. And if I don't get it done tomorrow, maybe I'll get it done the next day. So, you know, I think certainly being retired is an absolute gift.
Yeah.
And but I took early retirement as well, and most of my colleagues thought I was insane. You know, why would I give up a good job? And I thought, because really, there's more stuff to do. I'm having more fun, and you know, life's short.
Yeah, life is definitely short. Aaliyah, how would you do that work-life balance? Like I said, you got a new part of that work-life balance that is relatively new and everything. So how are you balancing that work-life balance?
Yeah, well, I'm inspired by both of you too, and I definitely want to get to the point where I can retire. That's going to be exciting when that happens. But I think about this, and my partner and I talk about it all the time of like, what does retirement actually, would that be for us? And maybe it is kind of not necessarily having like the regular job we have to go to all the time, but even more time to pursue the passions. But I think one thing for me has been, you know, I had a corporate career until 2011, and then I quit. And I decided I was going to not take my corporate salary, and instead I was going to be an entrepreneur and an artist. And it's probably one of the best decisions I've ever made, but it was also a big choice. And I think part of that was like, my brother passed when he was 40, right? So I decided, I think at that point, that I didn't want to spend my life kind of, you know, working day in, day out for somebody else's, you know, corporate greed and profit. But instead I wanted to really pursue the things that were calling me, and hopefully make a life that I don't feel like I need to kind of retire from. Like I can have a lot of joy and pleasure in the work that I'm doing. It doesn't mean that I don't get tired and sometimes feel like I don't really want to grade these papers or whatever that thing is. You know, there's still things that come with the jobs that can be taxing, but so far I've been pretty good at saying yes to the things I love and yes to the things that light me up. And then I really love no. And I, especially, you know, post-pandemic, I got so good at being like, no, I'm tired. I don't want to meet you, you know, out for dinner, or that dance class looks amazing. I'm going to have to make it next time, or there's only so many jobs I can have at once, and really feel like I can give enough attention to each of them. And with a partner, you know, there's also that negotiation of their schedule, my schedule. How do we make
Sure.
those match up? Which we haven't figured out at all yet. We're like completely like ships in the night, but we'll get there at some point. But at least we're both doing things that really, bring us a lot of joy. If we were, kind of doing work that made us terribly unhappy and we still didn't see each other a lot, then we'd have to really reconsider the balance there. But so I don't know if that I have an answer yet, but I'm just trying to do the work that really makes me excited to, be alive and keep moving forward.
We have one other guest that will be joining us, and we still got about roughly 50 minutes or an hour to go and everything. So I want to bring in Shirley and all along those lines. But you brought up a very key word in that space, and that's this notion of no. And I sometimes think that we have a hard time saying no. I know that even in the arts world, sometimes I am given opportunities and sometimes I am talked into them when I should say no and all into that space. So I just wondered if all of you could speak to that notion of no, because it's a very simple word, just like yes, it's a very simple word. But sometimes we are scared of saying no, afraid of the consequences of saying no and everything. So what advice would you give to folks in order to give them the resolve to say that word no, which is only 2 letters, but sometimes we have a hard time saying it?
I think when I was younger, I had more of a difficult time saying no than now. Now I just don't care because I'm older. I mean, I'm older. I know that the consequences of saying no are not bad. Like before, when I was younger, I thought if I said no, then somebody might not like me, or I might not get this position, or whatever. And I realized that saying no is actually, courageous and a good thing. And it actually is self-preservation, right? And so now I'm okay with saying no, and I'm okay with whatever consequence comes with that. And then normally it's not as bad as you think.
Yeah, that's very much true and everything. Shirley, if you'll introduce yourself to the audience, that's the way the online dinner party comes about. I invite various people and we just share our stories. So right now we've been talking about artistry and creativity, but also education and the importance of education. And now we're talking about life skills. So like that whole notion of no and everything. And the other thing that I was getting ready to get to, but I definitely want you to introduce yourself first, is this notion of the inner critic, because I also know that is something that I am notorious for. There have been jobs, including even some jobs at the Hayti Center, that I have not gone for because I was too busy having conversations with myself about why I shouldn't go for the job or should go for the job. But by the time you decide to go for the job is long gone and all in that space. But I just wondered if you could share a little bit of introduction, Mr. Buck, and everything, and then also if you'll share maybe some thoughts around this notion of that inner critic.
Hi, I'm Shirley Buck, and I am a mindset transformation coach. I'm also the author of an international best-selling book, Sweet Freedom Whispered in My Ear. One of the things that I have a 90-day course, and I spend a whole week on that course on self-love and confidence. So I totally get the inner critic. I had just hopped on. I don't know if I was, the time difference was mistaken, but so I'm not really sure what everyone was chatting about. But yeah, the inner critic can be dangerous. But it's also a way, I believe, that we're conditioned so much in this life to, say yes, to kind of, if we love ourselves or we're too confident, then we're arrogant, so we're always walking that line. But I think being confident and owning what you know is important.
Yeah, that's very much the case and everything. And that plays into what we've been talking about, because definitely it's about that notion of education and the importance of education and what some of the things that we've not been teaching even in our education courses. One of the things that I know the founders of this particular network are very big on is this notion that we should be teaching financial literacy as well as creativity and some other things. I mean, if they had their way, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with this one, and I'd gotta hear your thoughts around this, Brian, and everything, but they would have us all learn the budget, meaning the congressional budget. And I think that might be a little bit of too much to bite off and all in that space. But that's something that Nick is one of the two founders, Kim Calhoun is the other one, has been pushing, is this idea that every citizen needs to get a copy of the budget and read the budget and understand it. And I've seen some of those budgets. I'm going like, I don't know if I want to read the entire budget.
Yeah. I'm not sure if all the Congress people have read the budget. So,
I agree with you there.
I think financial literacy is something that is appropriate, because I think that's a life skill, right? And we all need that. And I think so many people leave, school or wherever, and they're having difficulties managing their finances. And so I think it is something that is important. I want to go back to something, and Eileen said it earlier, and I didn't have a chance to respond when we talked about teaching to the test. As a principal, and I think this is really important, Eileen, and she kind of got to it. If we teach in such a way where we're engaging kids and they're learning and they're loving to learn, the test will take care of itself, right? And so that's what we tried to do. It's not that we ignored the test. I mean, that's part of life. But we said we're gonna encourage play. I have a book that I wrote. It's called "What About Us: The PLC at Work Process for Pre-K through grades 2," and we encourage play. And we're going to teach the standards. We're going to teach skills, but we're going to use play as a vehicle. The kids don't even know they're learning the standards. It's because we're teaching it through play. And so I think it's not an either or. Those tests are not going to go away, unfortunately, or fortunately. But we can teach in such a way where kids love learning, and they're going to learn the skills. And when the test comes, it's not going to be like the end all be all. And so we shouldn't make the test like the gold standard. Like they have to pass this test. We say, love learning. You're going to learn these skills. We're going to teach you some test taking skills, but when the test comes, you're going to be fine. It's not like we're going to be killing and drilling you all day on test prep. That's not what we did in our school. And so many schools may do that, but I think we are starting to learn, and we have enough evidence that we can teach kids engaging lessons through different modes, and also prepare them for the tests, if you will, at the end of the year. But it's not going to be a straight focus on the test, because that is a recipe for kids not liking school, because they're focused on the wrong thing. When you're just focused on the test, you're not focused on learning.
Well, along those same lines, and this is for Aaliyah and everything, because one of the things that has always fascinated me, and I've got friends that are in the entrepreneurial space, a number of entrepreneurial space friends and everything, whether it's restaurants or whether it's arts groups or a number of other things that are in that space, is I sometimes feel that too often, and you kind of alluded to it because you went into the corporate world before winning into the arts and entrepreneurial world, is that too often we are teaching to go into corporate America. And I don't know if Shirley agrees with me on this or not, and not teaching enough around entrepreneurial skills and some of those other skills. And sometimes when we go into the entrepreneurial skills, we've not been trained in how to deal with those entrepreneurial skills. I don't know whether you had that knowledge of even a business plan or things along those lines when you went the entrepreneurial journey and everything. So I just wanted your thoughts. And then I also want to hear from Shirley this notion that maybe we're teaching too much to, I hate to use this analogy, but I did mention that play is going on, or this musical later on this evening, but we might be going back to the slave narrative, because a lot of people will say that certain corporations are almost run as plantations and all in that space. So I just wanted your take as to whether maybe we're teaching people too quickly to go and work for quote unquote the man, if I can use that terminology.
Yeah, I mean, I think my path was a little interesting in that I went to Duke for undergrad. So obviously I'm there with a bunch of people who already knew when they came in, they wanted to be a doctor, a lawyer, go into, the finance industry, consulting, maybe politics. There were a lot of people who came in and knew exactly what they wanted to do. And I was a little weird already coming in saying I'm a dancer and that's what I wanted to do. And my mother negotiated with me to make sure that I went to college, because I really wanted to, at 18, go to New York and start my dance career. And she was like, well, why don't you try it for 1 year? And if you hate it, then you can leave. And I ended up having a wonderful experience and also getting to do so much great dancing, right? So I came out and I went into my dance career, but along the way I was like, dance is really, I was not making any kind of money. And I was like, I need to find a way to sustain myself. And I had always worked in retail and ended up getting into like a retail training program and going to work for Snap Corporate, right? So a big corporation that has like a lot of reach around the world. And when I got a little kind of burnt out from that and disillusioned, I was like, well, let me start my own store, because I did, to Shirley's point, like own the stuff I knew. Like I had trained well in retail. I understood the store experience. I understood how to engage with customers. I understood how to produce a t-shirt from, the seed to the fabric to, you know, getting it to the US. There were skills that I learned from that time at Gap that I was able to transfer into my entrepreneurial business, which is a retail store alongside my dancing. But there's so much more to learn still when you start your own business, right? And I had never written a business plan, but if I think about transferable skills, like I knew how to research, I knew how to look things up and learn how to do them, right? Which I had shown in high school and in college. Like I knew how to go on Google, how to write a business plan, find a business plan template, find sample business plans, and write one. And that was how I got my first commercial lease and all of those things. No one even, you know, I don't even think I shared it with too many people, maybe outside of my business partner and my family. I didn't like take it to an MBA and say, please look at this. Is this a legit business plan? But I had enough confidence that I could teach myself how to do this. And that was how I jumped into being an entrepreneur. But I think I'm still learning every single day because there's so many pieces of being an entrepreneur. And if you're like me, where it's kind of a sole proprietor business, you have to do everything. So I'm like doing my own website and my social media and my budget and my, you know, cost analysis, as well as like designing the clothing and getting it produced. There's so many different things to learn, but luckily enough, I like to keep learning. So maybe it's kind of circling back to that idea that if you teach kids how to learn and that it can be fun, then it's a skill that if you're not intimidated to try something new and maybe be bad at it for a while, then it can serve you again down the line. So that's my sort of entrepreneurial spiel.
What's your thought around that, Shirley, and everything? Because I did mention that I do think sometimes that because there was a time, even as I remember growing up in the 70s, that there was a vocational track. We were actually talking about that earlier, and a lot of those tracks are no longer. I mean, there are tech vocational tracks that are strong, but a lot of the more traditional vocational tracks like plumbing and bricklaying, you can find a lot of schools are not teaching that as much as they used to. So these things that we are maybe pushing people to go into like one specific style of work and everything, and not necessarily thinking about the other kind of works that are out there.
Well, first of all, I want to say, Brian, great job. I love hearing that you're incorporating fun into school.
Thank you.
I always felt like there's one curriculum for like, or one way of teaching for millions of kids, you know, and that's always been the case. And it's not always, you know, the way to go. And incorporating fun and teaching things like, I believe mindset is really important too. But getting back to your question, being an entrepreneur for me was a kind of a different reason why I became an entrepreneur and always have been. My childhood wasn't the traditional childhood. It was with, you know, it included a lot of severe trauma, abuse, and I was pretty much out on the streets at 15 years old. And so for me, school and college wasn't something that I participated in or even had a way of doing it. And if there was a way, I sure wasn't aware of it. Both my parents were deaf as well, so they had no idea about the importance of education either. So for me, it was kind of sink or swim. You know, I wanted to make money. I didn't have a college degree, so I got creative. So sorry about that. And so I, like you, I had no idea how to make a business plan or anything like that. I just dove in, and I did it before internet was even a thing. I started out with like dog walking, and it became a very lucrative job. But I had to post those little flyers everywhere and little tabs to tear off. You know, it wasn't. Then I had to learn the whole internet scene, and I just kept progressing with different businesses. And, you know, along the way, I was always coaching people because people were always like, and I was a single parent at 2 when my children were 2 and 4 years old. And I didn't want to be gone all the time. I wanted to make money. I didn't want them to, you know, suffer from that. So, and I did put them in private schools and college and all that on my own. So being an entrepreneur is wonderful. You know, it really is. If you can take all the, you know, things that come along with that, you know, because you do have to make sure that you're doing what you need to do, because nobody's telling you to clock in, do this, and you get paid, and you don't get vacation pay. And, you know, there's a whole lot of different you've got to make sure you're saving for your future, because no employer is taking that money out and putting it towards Social Security. So there's a lot of pros and cons. I personally love it, and I don't think that I think that sometimes pushing college and the corporate world is a lot of pressure. And I feel like, honestly, I've done a lot better than some of my friends who did go to college, and they're stressed out and they're not making the money, and I kind of feel like that shouldn't be taught as the only way to go.
Yeah.
I'm not knocking college. I think college is wonderful for a lot of people, and I think it teaches a lot of amazing things. I'm just saying that there are other options, and there's, if you aren't able to go to college, or you haven't been able to go, there are ways to be creative and be successful.
No, and along those same lines, because it kind of alludes to what we were talking about before you came on, Shirley, and everything, was one of the things that we talked about was this notion of labeling, because I had talked about at-risk use, and sometimes I feel that is a bad terminology because you're kind of making a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm thinking that with your background that you just alluded to and everything, that there were probably people that were already designating you as going to be a failure even in the school system based on what you had gone through with your family and your own traumas that you just mentioned and everything. So I was wondering if that's something that you encountered when you were in school, and I'm guessing based on the way you described it that this was a few decades ago and we don't need to know.
Oh, absolutely. I was totally disregarded, as there's no way I would be able to overcome everything I went through and then be successful on top of it. It's impossible, but it's not impossible. And that's why I do what I do today. And I'd never been through therapy or traditional meds or anything like that, traditional therapy, probably because nobody ever even took the time to think that I needed that or put me in that situation. But I did it strictly through mindset transformation, learning about the power of positive thinking, manifestation, laws of attraction. And I came across that. Luckily, I was 23 years old when I actually had a breakdown. Everything hit me, and I wanted to get better. That's when I just started delving into learning all about this, and it changed my life. And I'm just so grateful. And so I want to teach others that the labels, like you say, they're detrimental. People will come to me and say, well, I have this, I have that, well, you might have had the symptoms of that, but that's not who you are.
Yeah.
You can change that. So labels are very dangerous sometimes.
I wish I had met you all before I wrote my book. On chapter 5 of my book, I have a section called Finding Inspiration in the Success of Others. And the reason why I wrote it, I highlight some school districts, but I also highlight individuals who have had very different paths. And because a lot of times people say, well, this is me. I don't see anybody like me or had my similar journey. How do I get there? And so seriously, I would have put you all in my book because there are so many people who will, it's not an excuse. It's like, well, I don't know how to do this. And Shirley, what you had kind of shared is like, it's learning by doing. You just jump in, you make mistakes, you go back to the drawing board. You too, Aaliyah, you're just trying things and you learn more from your mistakes.
Absolutely.
In that challenge than you would have just somebody just spoon fed you or just held your hand all the way through, because you're building it. People are less likely to tear down a fence if they help to build it, or if they build it. If somebody's building that fence for you, then you have no ownership.
Right. When you invest, one of my favorite sayings is, a winner is just a loser that tried one more time.
Yeah.
You just got to keep going. You got to keep going. And like you said, you don't want to tear down your own fence. You invested all this time, money, work. So you don't want to give up. You just keep going. And, eventually doors open up and opportunities come. But it is a test. I mean, there's sure. Things that come at you where some days you feel like I can't do this anymore. It's too hard. And
but surely along those same lines and everything, I know that a lot of times people are, because definitely during the pandemic, and we saw it quite a bit, people got into mindset and definitely kind of being aligned in a lot of ways, meaning that they were, and you kind of alluded to it, Brian, with your wife and everything. They're physically fit, spiritually fit, mentally fit, and I would argue emotionally fit as well, because I think you got to be all four aligned and all in that space. So there was a lot of that talk of alignment and everything. But then a lot of people were also starting to feel, and I don't necessarily agree with them, but you got people that are out there being the hyper critics of positivity, and they're thinking that it's a lot of cliches and a lot of answers in that space. So Shirley, what is your answer to those folks that are going like, yeah, I can tell myself all day long that I can think positively, but can I actually get anywhere with this positive mindset and everything? So I'm sure that you've even got some pushback in different ways where people are like, that just sounds like a cliche.
It is, when you say change your life or change your mind, change your life, it does sound like a cliche, but it's so real. There's so many different ways to do it. There's journaling, there's meditation, I actually have a 90-day course that if you with weekly lessons, with daily activities that kind of train your mind, because you got to train your mind. You can't just say, well, I'm going to think positive and my life's going to change. Because people who are used to thinking in a negative way, they kind of made that groove in their head. But a belief is just a thought that you thought for a long time, right? So once you start thinking different thoughts, you start getting different, beliefs, and things do start changing. And it's miraculous, actually, but it really works. It really does.
It works and everything. Leah, are there any affirmations that you use in your dance performances and in your life in general? And the same goes for Brian and Eileen as well. So are there any common affirmations that you have that you use to get you through the day?
I don't think I have any that are super clever, but oftentimes it's just like, give it a try, see what happens kind of thing in my classes often. And then, in dance in particular, sometimes we're doing things that you literally fall, like hit the ground. Right. So as long as you haven't hurt yourself when you hit the ground, I'm like, okay, falling is information, right? It tells us something about what we did with our body, maybe what we don't want to do the next time. And so to that point that we've talked a little bit about, sort of like taking the play and taking the failure and having a good time with like not being perfect and learning along the way. That's kind of the main sort of thing in my class. It's like, obviously you're not going to get better at it if you don't try it. So that's the first thing. And if you try and it doesn't go well, all right, it didn't go well. What happens if you try it a little differently and see what happens? But yeah.
What about yourself, Eileen? Are there any affirmations that you use regularly?
Well, I think the one is just to do it, do something. I think you said earlier, the worst place you can be is thinking in your own head. That doesn't really help. So you actually have to, either talk to somebody else, listen to something else, and then do something else, like do something different. And if you do something different, you're going to have a different result, no matter how that happens. So one of my things, I used to say no a lot, and it gave me a certain flavor in life. And now I actually say yes to a lot more, because at least it opens me up to some other opportunity or some other possibility that wasn't actually there unless I said yes to it. So actually my next book is called Embrace the Edge. Life is bigger when you say yes.
Oh, I love
so
that.
I've kind of gone the other direction, because everybody's like, no, boundary. I think, no.
Eileen,
Let's open up the boundaries.
Shonda Rhimes, the writer and really famous TV producer who does like
Grey's Anatomy.
Grey's Anatomy, Bridgerton.
Oh, yes.
She has a book called The Year of Yes, where she basically said yes to a whole bunch of things for 1 year that she would have always said no to. I mean, I think that's good relationship advice too. When your partner asks you to do the thing all the time, you always like, oh, I don't want to do that. No. Every now and again saying yes can be a good strategy.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, I need that book too. So I'm good at saying no now, and I need to say yes more, I guess now.
Hey, Brian, what would be your affirmations that you use and everything, and then get ready to wind down shortly, because I've actually got to run to Hey Dad, because we've got another class there that'll be the Aaliyah teaches ballet, but we've got yoga today and yoga tomorrow as well,
wow.
And everything. So
I'm not so sure I have any affirmations. I just kind of pull off of my athletic background, being on a team, and really knowing that there's ebbs and flows to playing in a basketball game, just like there's ebbs and flows of life. And so I guess the idea of get comfortable being uncomfortable, because you're always going to be, not always, but many times going to be uncomfortable with certain situations. And so I don't let that floor me. I don't let that just stop me. And I just say, I kind of have to just ride the wave and get through it. But I also feel like, just again, the people I put around me, the experiences that my parents modeled for me, and my other siblings and friends, I just know that there's always kind of this light at the end of the tunnel, or the storm is going to eventually end and the sun's going to come out at some point, and then there's going to be another storm. So I just think that being as even keel as I can, through those storms and through those challenging times, and also when it's really something great, I embrace it. But again, I don't think I have one saying. I just try to just live life kind of the way it was modeled for me through sports.
That makes a lot of sense and everything. As we get ready to wind down and all along those lines, I'm actually going to go off camera for a second, but I'll start with you, Aaliyah. But one of the things I get everybody to do on this show is tell how they can be reached, how they can be contacted. And definitely, like I said, it is a global network, meaning Pod TV is. So any message of positivity that they have for our global audience that is heard in something like 175 or 200 countries, depending on who you're listening to, and all along those lines and everything. So any message of positivity that you can share, and ways that folks can get in contact with you if they want to get the dance class, and who knows, maybe you've got a book coming out at some point as well.
People keep telling me I'm going to write one of these days. I would say that you can find me at my name, Aaliyah, ALYAH, Baker, BAKER.com. That's my website. You can find pretty much everything I do is on there. Needs some updating, but the basics are there. And then just message of positivity, maybe I would say kind of, piggybacking off of Eileen, just, get out of your head and do it. Like, you can't actually, nothing's going to happen if you, sit there by yourself and don't try to put some action behind it. So get out there and do it.
And we'll just go round circles. So I'll go to Eileen and then Shirley, and then you'll close us out, Brian, and everything. But Eileen, any ways that you can be reached and contacted, and any messages of positivity, and if you want to talk about your book as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, my website again, eileenforrester.com. And I'm generally over Facebook. You can find me on Eileen Forrester on Facebook. And my book is called The Courage to Shine, and it's Find Your Voice and Discover the Healing Power of Your Words. So it's available on Amazon. And it's a memoir, why not write your own story? That's what I say.
Sure.
So that's mine.
And I think, Shirley, you're next.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
For me, I guess I would like to say, be the change that you want to see. Without deviation from the norm, progress is impossible, which I think Frank Zappa said. So if you want change, you got to change what you're doing, for sure. You can find me at shirleybuck.com. And my book is on there as well, but it's also on Amazon, and I guess Target and Walmart have it too. I just found that out the other day, which I was excited about. But the book is called Sweet Freedom Whispered in My Ear. And I also have a private community Facebook group, Red Leaf Healing. If you look that up and you request to join, then I have a series of questions, and I blog on there, and I communicate with people on there as well. So,
and my website is brianbutler.info, brianbutler.info, and my book is Every Student Deserves a Gifted Education. I think what I would say to end, and I use this African proverb at my dad's funeral 4 years ago, and it says, "As I go, I am wearing you." And so the people, who look at Brian Butler and say Brian has been successful, I say, no, these are all the people I am wearing. The hundreds of people who have poured into me, my family, my friends, my teachers, my coaches, everybody who has helped me along the way. You are seeing Brian Butler. And so I would encourage people to, as you move through this journey called life, to talk about the people who you are wearing, who have helped you along the way. And tonight, I'm wearing Mark and Shirley and Eileen and Leah. These are more people who now I've learned from, and now I'm wearing. So as I go out and share my story, I can talk about people who have really influenced me along the way. And so as I go, I am wearing you.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful.
Well, I appreciate all of you and everything, and hopefully I can get all of you back at a future episode. And yeah, it was the time difference in terms of getting Shirley on, but I'll give her some more time on a future episode and all along those lines. But I definitely had some great insight from everybody involved, and hope that y'all can make a return trip, because the online dinner party is just different folks coming and sharing their wisdom under kind of like my guiding with the questions and everything. But I hope everybody enjoyed themselves, and we'll make a return trip in the near future, because I love doing this show every Wednesday at 4:00 and just having this kind of guided conversation that can go anywhere from an hour and a half to an hour and 45 lately, even though there was a time before Hey Tide came back open that we were sometimes having 2.5 hour conversations. So I'm glad that the center opened, because it definitely had me narrow the conversations to some degree as well. But definitely, hopefully, can have y'all back on in the near future. And by the way, Brian, I've been reading that book. You did send me a copy, and it is definitely a great book. So
Thank you.
In some other books as well that have been mentioned, and we do have an Amazon bookstore that's tied to Pod TV, so all of your books will be on that store, so that folks can hopefully be getting a copy of that through our website that has that to it as well. So definitely, I've been enjoying the book, and we'll be maybe even on Tuesday, since I'll be seeing her on Tuesday if she wants to take a glance at the book and all of that space.
Well, thank you, Mark. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's nice meeting you all. Thank
I was
you.
just gonna say that. Nice meeting you all.
Can't wait to read your books.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna read
Aaliyah,
yours
you
as well.
too.
Aaliyah, you're gonna write one for sure.
Yeah, gotta get to it.
I always wanted to be a dancer, by the way. So God bless.
Maybe we can dance together sometime.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Sounds like it could be a dance event going on that Aaliyah and Shirley could be dancing in a tandem performance or something like that
There
in
you go.
some part of the world. So that
You never know.
Yeah.
Life's full of possibilities.
Yeah.
That's what life is. It's
As
full of
long as you say yes, right, Eileen?
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
just have to say yes and all along those lines.
With a big smile. Yes, of course.
That's right.
I'm gonna coach everybody as we go out with this particular commercial. This is actually a vegan vegetarian dish that's out of Raleigh, and all along those lines. So every time I play this particular commercial, one, I can't believe that it's vegan, and two, I'm going like, this is too good to be going on. And a lot of times my fellow guests and fellow people are like, you just tortured me. I was trying to go on that diet, and then you had to play this particular commercial. So we'll go out with this particular vegan dish that is at the Black Farmers Market in Raleigh, as y'all will find out during this commercial. But I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I'm ready to head to Hey Tide and catch that musical performance that I was talking about that Duke is doing, because it is a Duke performance that is going on in that space. So I'll catch y'all later on Pod TV, and also in the various places that I frequent, including the Hey Tide Heritage Center. But right now, let's get out by checking out this particular commercial.
Hi, my name is Maria Jones, baker and owner of Very Vegan, a premier mobile bakery specializing in putting a plant-based spin on some of your favorite desserts. Inspired by my own personal experience with my journey with healthier eating habits, I was determined to make comparable items with desirable textures and great taste. We're always experimenting with different flavor profiles and expanding our menu. I enjoy my creative license as well as imparting ideas and requests from my customers. It makes for new and exciting items. Some of our customer faves are the specialty cheesecakes such as the banana pudding with homemade vegan vanilla wafers, strawberry crunch, honey bun, fruity pebbles, peach cobbler, and many others. We also offer moist, rich cupcakes, delectable cookies, decadent brownies, and scrumptious pound cake. Discover how amazingly delicious vegan can be. I am available for orders, or you can purchase my items exclusively at the Black Farmers Hub.